Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, Nizoni, I'll be yours.
And I'll be hers.
The Apache woman thought she'd die in those chains until the rancher set her free. Socorro, New Mexico territory. Late October 1882. The wind carried ash that day. It rolled across the high desert in gray waves thick with the smell of burned wood, and something worse flesh perhaps, or the memory of it. Mercer Hale rode through it slow, his buckskin gelding picking careful steps over the cracked earth. The sky hung low and colorless, the kind of sky that made a man feel small. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a handful of lost cattle that had broken through the fence line 2 nights before. Red Willow Ranch sat too far from town for neighbors to help, and Mercer had learned long ago that a man alone fixes his own problems or learns to live with them. The ranch sat alone on the mesa, a collection of weathered buildings surrounded by miles of silence. Once it had been full, his wife's laughter, the smell of cornbread baking, the sound of her singing in the Apache tongue she'd taught him word by word. Ara. Her name still caught in his throat like a thorn. She had died 5 winters ago, her body buried beneath the cottonwood where she used to hang laundry in the summer wind. The child she carried died with her. After that, Mercer sent the ranch hands away. There was nothing left to manage but ghosts and grief. He was 42 now, though the sun and loss had carved him older. His face was weathered leather, his eyes the gray of winter sky. He carried the weight of the ranch like a crossland, inherited, loved, and now haunted. That morning he followed cattle tracks into a shallow arroyo where the ground turned dark, too dark. He slowed his horse, lifted his hat to shade his eyes, and saw it. A wagon half collapsed and still smoking. The canvas top torn open like a wound, the wooden ribs blackened and broken. 2 mules lay stiff in their harness, throats cut clean, their blood pooled black in the dust. The bodies of 2 men sprawled nearby, missionaries by the look of them. Black coats, white collars, stained red faces turned toward a sky that offered no answers. Their pockets had been turned out, their boots stolen. Mercer climbed down, rifle loose in his hand, scanning the ridge for movement. The bandits were long gone, hours, maybe a day. He crouched beside the wagon, sifting through the ashes with the barrel of his gun. Flour spilled like snow across scorched wood. A Bible half charred, its pages curled and brown. A rosary melted into the dirt, the beads fused together by heat. Then he heard it, the faint scrape of metal on wood. He froze. The sound came again. Desperate. Human. Mercer stepped around the wagon's tailboard, gun raised. There, half hidden beneath a torn tarp, was a young woman. Barefoot. Filthy. Her ankle locked in a steel shackle bolted to the wagon frame. Her skin was copper dark beneath layers of dust and dried blood. Her dress, a torn calico that might once have been blue, was stained with soot and worse. In her hand she clutched a shard of broken glass, the edge red, where she'd been sawing at the chain. She'd been trying to cut herself free. When Mercer cast a shadow over her, she looked up. Her eyes were black, wild, and full of fight. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just raised the glass shard like a knife. "Easy," Mercer said quietly, raising both hands, the rifle pointed at the sky. "I'm not here to hurt you." She tried to crawl away. The chain yanked her back with a clatter that echoed across the empty arroyo. Mercer knelt slowly, setting the rifle aside. He pulled a metal file from his saddlebag, the kind used for sharpening plow blades. The first scrape of iron made her flinch, her whole body going rigid. But he worked steady, patient, the rasp of metal on metal mixing with the whisper of wind through sage. When the link finally gave, the shackle fell loose with a dull thud. She didn't move at first, just stared at her free ankle like she didn't understand the word freedom. Her skin there was raw, bleeding, ringed with bruises the color of old plums. Then she spoke low, hoarse, in broken English. "They will come back." Mercer frowned, still kneeling. Her eyes flicked toward the bodies of the missionaries, then beyond toward the ridge. Not them. The others. The ones who paid for me. Before he could ask more, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed sideways into the dust. Mercer poured water from his canteen, tilted her head back gently, let it trickle between her cracked lips. She coughed, spilling most of it down her chin. He wrapped her in his blanket rough wool that smelled of horse and smoke and lifted her onto his saddle. She was light, too light, all bones and sharp angles beneath the torn dress. The ride back to Red Willow took hours. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the hills the color of rust and old blood. The girl swayed behind him in the saddle, half-conscious, murmuring words in a language he recognized but didn't speak. Apache. Like Era used to speak when she was dreaming. When they reached the ranch, twilight had fallen. The air turned cold. Mercer carried the girl inside, laid her on a wool blanket near the fireplace, and struck a match. The flames caught quick, flickering over cracked adobe walls over the table, where Era's sewing basket still sat untouched after 5 years. For the first time since he'd buried his wife, Mercer felt the weight of another heartbeat in that house. He poured more water into a tin cup, set it beside the girl, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind was dying now, the air cold and perfectly still. He looked across the dark expanse of his land. The broken fences, the empty corral, the cottonwood standing alone against the stars, and whispered almost to himself, "Guess it ain't just ghosts anymore." Before we continue, don't forget to drop a comment with the number 1 if you're watching from somewhere the wind still whispers stories like this. Let's see where you're tuning in from. The fire hissed low in the hearth, throwing ribbons of gold and shadow across the old ranch house. The girl lay curled on the blanket near the flames, her face ghost pale against the orange flicker. Her eyes stayed open, following every move Mercer made, as if each step might bring pain. He didn't speak. Words weren't what she needed. He set a tin cup of water and a bowl of thin cornmeal mush beside her, then backed away slowly, the way you'd back away from a wounded animal. The smell of smoke and old pine filled the air. Outside wind scraped at the shutters, a lonesome sound like claws against bone. Mercer watched from the doorway. She didn't touch the food. Her hands were small, trembling, bruised dark around the wrists where rope had been. He knew the look on her face, someone half alive waiting to die. He'd seen it once before in the mirror 5 winters ago. He left the door open when he stepped outside. Let her see the way was clear. Let her know she wasn't his prisoner. Out on the porch, he lit a lantern and sat in the cold, the boards creaking beneath his boots. His horse Sully snorted from the corral, restless in the wind. Mercer pulled his coat tight and looked back through the open doorway. The girl hadn't moved. The firelight painted her in motionless color, bronze and ash and fear. Hours passed before he saw her lift the spoon, slow as dawn breaking, and eat. Just a few bites. Then she lay back down, pulled the blanket to her chin, and stared into the fire again. That night, Mercer took his bedroll to the porch and slept near the door, his rifle within arm's reach. He woke before sunrise to find the fire, long dead frost creeping across the windows in delicate patterns. Inside, the blanket was empty. His heart kicked. He grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. He found her huddled against the outer wall of the house, knees drawn to her chest, shivering under the stars. Her breath came in short clouds. She'd wrapped herself in the blanket, but it wasn't enough. Mercer crouched beside her, keeping his distance. "It's cold out here. Come inside." She shook her head, not looking at him. "The house smells like white man, like churches, like chains." Her voice was raw, barely more than a whisper. Mercer stood there a long time, the frost crunching under his boots. He nodded once. No argument, no anger, just understanding. Then he walked back inside, threw another log on the hearth, and left the door open wide. He stoked the fire until it roared, heat pouring out into the cold morning. He made sure the flames burned bright and warm all through the night. She came inside an hour later, moving slow, and sat as close to the fire as she could, without touching it. Each day settled into quiet rhythm. Mercer repaired the corral fence, hammering new rails into place. He tended the handful of cattle that hadn't wandered off, checked their hooves for rot, moved them to fresh grazing. He mended the roof where winter wind had torn shingles loose. The girl, he still didn't know her name, stayed near the porch, watching from the shadows. Sometimes she took water from the trough. Sometimes she followed him with her eyes as he worked, her expression unreadable. By the third evening, she stepped inside the house again. She didn't speak, didn't eat much, just cornbread and weak coffee, but she stayed longer this time. Her eyelids grew heavy. The fear in her shoulders began to ease just a little. Mercer left her there by the fire and moved quietly about the house, sweeping dust that had gathered like years, fixing door hinges that squeaked. He didn't look at her too long. Didn't want her to mistake his presence for threat. He remembered how Ara once said that silence could heal, when words only reopened wounds. That night he heard coughing through the walls, rough, horse wet. He rushed to the porch and found the girl slumped against the wooden step, shaking with fever. Her skin burned to the touch. He didn't think, just lifted her into his arms. She tensed immediately, her breath quick and panicked, her body going rigid. But her strength gave out. Her head fell against his chest, heat radiating through the blanket like a furnace. Mercer carried her inside and laid her near the hearth, stoking the fire high until it roared bright and hot. He fetched water from the barrel, pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, and stayed beside her as the wind screamed outside and rattled the shutters. Through the long hours of night, he kept the fire burning. He changed the cloth when it grew warm. He poured water between her lips when she stirred. Her fever spiked twice her body, convulsing, and both times he thought he might lose her the way he'd lost Ara. But just before dawn, the fever broke. Sweat darkened her hair, plastering it to her temples. Her breath evened out, no longer shallow and desperate. When her eyes opened again, they found his. For the first time, she didn't flinch. Mercer sat back in the chair across from her, exhaustion pulling at his bones. The firelight flickered between them. Neither spoke. The only sound was the crack of burning logs and the sigh of the dying wind. And in that silence, fragile, human, and real, the ghosts of Red Willow seemed to fall still. The next morning she spoke. "Nizhoni." Mercer looked up from the stove where he was frying salt pork. "That your name?" She nodded slowly, sitting up on the blanket. "It means beautiful. My mother said it so I would not forget who I was, even when they tried to make me forget." He poured coffee into a tin cup, set it in front of her on the floor. The steam rose between them. "Mercer Hale." She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, the way you'd study a map of dangerous country. Then quietly, "You are the second white man who did not hurt me. Who was the first?" Her face darkened. "A soldier at Fort Union. He gave me bread once when the Mission brothers forgot to feed us. Then the captain shot him for it. Said he was fraternizing with savages." Mercer said nothing, just sipped his coffee and let the silence sit. Nizhoni wrapped both hands around the warm cup as if trying to pull the heat into her bones. "The men in the wagon, they bought me. From the mission in Santa Fe, Brother Crane's mission. They said I owed them my soul because they fed me for 3 years. You don't owe anyone your soul." She met his eyes. "You do not understand how the world works, Mercer Hale. The church has papers. Legal papers. They say I belong to them. They will come for me." Mercer leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. "Let them come." 3 days later, a rider appeared on the ridge. Mercer saw him first, a lone figure in a black coat, moving slow and deliberate against the pale morning sky. He grabbed his Winchester and stepped onto the porch, levering around into the chamber. Nizhoni came to the doorway behind him, her face going pale as bone. "Do you know him?" Mercer asked without turning. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Brother Silas Crane. He runs the mission. He is the one who chained me to that wagon." The man dismounted at the gate, taking his time. He was tall and lean, with the kind of face that looked carved from stone, all sharp angles and cold purpose. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, but his smile was warm as summer sun. Brother Hale Crane called out, his voice smooth as oil. "I've come for what belongs to the Lord." "She's not property," Mercer said flatly. Crane pulled a folded paper from inside his coat, held it up like a holy relic. "The law disagrees, I'm afraid. Miss Nizhoni signed her faith and her labor to the Church of the New Dawn 3 years ago, when we saved her from starvation. She absconded last month. Stole church supplies, blankets, food, a silver cross. This document, signed by a territorial judge, affirms she remains under covenant and must return to fulfill her obligations." Nizhoni stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You chained me to a wagon and set it on fire. You left me to burn." Crane's smile didn't falter, not even a flicker. "A test of faith, child, to see if the Lord would deliver you. And he did through this good man here. Clearly you were meant to return to us purified." Mercer raised the rifle, aiming square at Crane's chest. "Get off my land." Crane tucked the paper away carefully as if it were made of glass. "I'll return with Sheriff Brody. He's a good Christian man. He'll uphold the law. And when I do come back, Mr. Hale, you'll hang beside her if you stand in the way of God's justice." He mounted his horse with the ease of a man who'd never doubted his righteousness and rode off slow. Dust trailed behind him like smoke from a dying fire. Nizhoni turned to Mercer, her eyes wide and wet. "He will come back. With men. With guns. You do not know him. He does not stop." Mercer lowered the rifle, his jaw tight. "Then we'll be ready." She shook her head hard. "No, you do not understand. He is not just a man of God. He is." She hesitated, searching for words that could carry the weight of memory. "He was there. The night my village burned. 10 years ago." Mercer went very still. "What are you saying? I was 12 summers old. Soldiers came to our camp near the Gila River. They said we harbored renegades, Apache warriors who had killed settlers. We did not. We were farmers. We grew corn and squash. But they did not care." Her voice dropped to barely more than breath. "Brother Crane." He was a soldier then. Lieutenant Crane. I saw him. He carried a torch. He lit the first roof. My mother pulled me into the river. We hid under the water, breathing through reeds. When we came up, she closed her eyes. Everything was ash. Everyone was dead. Mercer felt something cold settle in his chest. And now he's a preacher. He says God forgave him for what he did. But I think, she opened her eyes and they were black and hard as stone. I think he just found a new way to burn people. That night they prepared. Nizoni showed Mercer her hands, small, scarred, but steady. She'd learned to shoot at the mission-hunting rabbits to supplement the thin stew they were fed. She moved through the ranch house with purpose-packing cartridges into belts, checking the loads in every revolver and rifle. Mercer watched her work, surprised by her precision. "You don't have to fight," he said quietly. "I can send you south, across the border. You'd be safe in Mexico." She stopped what she was doing and looked at him, really looked at him. "You once told me I should not be afraid anymore." He nodded. "I am not afraid," she said. "Not of dying. Not of him. I am only afraid of running for the rest of my life." They spent the next 2 days fortifying the ranch. Mercer dragged old wagons to block the main approach, creating choke points. They positioned rifles in the barn loft behind the water trough near the porch. They herded the cattle into a tight cluster near the fence, their broad bodies forming a living wall. Nizoni worked beside him without complaint, carrying water-stacking ammunition, sharpening knives. In the evenings, she sat by the fire and sang softly in Apache songs Mercer didn't understand but felt in his bones. On the second night, she did something that surprised him. She reached into the torn pocket of her dress and pulled out a small object, a necklace made of turquoise stones, strung on leather cord. The stones were smooth worn, the color of summer sky. "This belonged to my mother," she said quietly. "It is supposed to protect the wearer." She held it out to him. Mercer shook his head. "You should keep it." "No." Her voice was firm. "You will be in more danger than me. I can hide. You cannot. You are the one they will want to kill first." She walked to him and placed the necklace around his neck. Her fingers brushed his skin, warm, deliberate. She tied it carefully, then stepped back. "Now you carry my mother's blessing," she said. "Do not waste it." The first sound of hooves came just as the sun broke the horizon 3 days later. 5 riders, silhouetted black against the pale dawn sky, descended the ridge in a line. At their head rode Brother Silas Crane, his black coat snapping in the wind like a crow's wing. Behind him came Sheriff Brody, an old man with a gray beard and tired eyes, and 3 others, Clay Hackett, a rancher from the next valley, and 2 hired guns Mercer didn't recognize. They reined up about 30 yards from the gate. Crane raised one hand almost like a benediction. "Mercer, hail. I return as promised. Under the authority of God and the law of this territory, surrender the woman, and there will be no bloodshed." Mercer stepped out onto the porch, Winchester in hand. "You've mistaken me for a man who bargains with devils." From the barn loft, a rifle cracked sharp and loud. The bullet kicked up dust directly between the hooves of Crane's horse. The animal reared and Crane fought the reins, his face twisting with rage. Nizoni's warning shot. Clay Hackett laughed a mean, ugly sound. "The little squaw learned to shoot, huh? Let's see how she dances. When the lead starts flying." He raised his shotgun. The mesa exploded into thunder. Mercer's Winchester barked 3 times fast. Hackett's hat flew off and he tumbled backward off his horse, clutching his shoulder. One of the hired guns fired back and splinters exploded from the porch railing beside Mercer's head. Nizoni fired again from the loft, methodical, precise. The other hired gun jerked sideways and fell, blood spreading across his vest. Gunfire roared through the cold morning. Smoke rolled across the corral in thick clouds. Horses screamed. The cattle bellowed and stampeded, left their hooves drumming like war drums. Sheriff Brody fired his pistol into the air, shouting for everyone to stop, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Crane spurred his horse forward, firing wildly with a revolver, screaming scripture at the top of his lungs. "The wages of sin is death. The Lord will strike down." The wicked Mercer ducked behind the water trough, levered another round, came up and fired. The bullet caught Crane high in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around in the saddle. But Crane didn't fall. He straightened, face twisted with fury and pain, and fired again. The shot hit Mercer in the side just below the ribs. He staggered, his vision tunneling. The rifle slipped from his hands. From the loft, Nizoni screamed a sound like something breaking. She fired twice more, fast as lightning. The first shot hit Crane's horse. The second hit Crane square in the chest. He jerked backward, clutching his Bible as if it might stop the bullet. It didn't. Brother Silas Crane tumbled from the saddle and hit the ground hard, his black coat spreading around him like wings. The Bible fell beside him, its pages fluttering open in the wind. The last of the riders, Sheriff Brody, and one wounded man turned their horses and fled, spurring hard toward the ridge. Within seconds, the only sounds left were the echo of hooves fading into the canyon and the ragged breathing of wounded men. Mercer collapsed against the water trough, his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and warm. Nizoni was there in seconds, sliding down the ladder from the loft, running across the yard. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands replacing his, pressing hard against the wound. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mercer, stay with me." He looked at her through the haze of pain, tried to smile. "We held it. We held our ground. Do not talk. Save your strength." But he kept looking at her face, soot-streaked, beautiful, alive, and thought about Ara, about how he'd failed to save her, about how this time maybe he'd done something right. "You're free now," he said quietly. "Crane's dead. No one's coming for you." "I do not care about that," she said fiercely. Tears cut tracks through the dust on her face. "I care that you do not die." The world went soft at the edges. The sky above turned the color of turquoise, the same color as the stones around his neck. "Nizoni," he said. "That's a good name. Your mother was right." Then the darkness took him. The winter after the gunfight was the longest Mercer Hale had ever known. Snow fell deep across the mesa, burying the scars of battle beneath a white silence. The bullet had torn through his side, missing vital organs by inches, but the wound festered. Fever came in waves. For 2 weeks he drifted in and out of consciousness. Nizoni refused to let him die. She cared for him with the patience of someone who understood that survival was a choice made every single day. She brewed teas from desert plants, yarrow for the bleeding sage, for infection willow bark for pain. She changed his bandages, washed his fevered skin with cool water, sang soft songs in a language older than the land itself. When the fever finally broke, Mercer woke to find her asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head resting on her arms, exhaustion written in every line of her body. He reached out slowly and touched her hair. She woke instantly, eyes wide. Then, seeing him awake and clear-eyed, she smiled, a real smile, the first he'd ever seen from her. "You came back," she whispered. "Couldn't leave you with all this work to do," he said, his voice rough as gravel. She laughed, actually laughed. The sound filled the small room like sunlight. Recovery was slow. Mercer couldn't ride for months. His wound ached when the weather turned cold, a deep throb that reminded him how close he'd come to dying. But he found new purpose in smaller things. He carved toys for a child that didn't exist yet, a wooden horse, a small wagon with wheels that turned. He sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching Nizoni work. She replanted the vegetable garden, repaired the chicken coop, tended the cattle with surprising skill. She sang while she worked, not the sad songs from before, but something lighter, hopeful. One evening in early spring, as the last snow melted and the first wildflowers pushed through the mud, Nizoni came and sat beside him on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "The land is waking up," she said quietly. Mercer nodded. "It does that. Every year. Even when you think it's dead." She turned to look at him. "Mercer Hale, I have a question." "Ask it. Why did you fight for me? You did not know me. I was nothing to you." He was quiet for a long time, watching the light fade. "Ara," he said finally. "My wife. She was Apache. When she died, I thought I'd failed her, failed to protect her, failed to give her the life she deserved." He looked at Nizoni. "Maybe I was trying to do right by her, by fighting for you." Nizoni reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm, calloused from work. "I think," she said slowly, "you were fighting for yourself too, to remember that you are still alive." He squeezed her hand. "Maybe so. When summer came, so did change." Nizoni moved her belongings from the small room by the barn into the main house. Not into Mercer's bed, not yet, but into the room that had once been meant for a child. She hung dried herbs from the rafters, swept the floors, filled the space with life. They worked the ranch together as partners. She taught him about plants, which ones healed, which ones could be eaten, which ones the cattle preferred. He taught her how to mend tack, how to shoe a horse, how to read the sky for weather. In the evenings they sat by the fire and talked. About their pasts, about their losses, about what it meant to survive when everyone you loved was gone. One night, Nizoni told him about her mother, how she'd been a healer respected in their village, how she'd taught Nizoni the songs, the prayers, the way to ask permission from plants before harvesting them. She told me, Nizoni said quietly, that the earth remembers everyone who loves it, that we leave marks even if no one sees them. Mercer thought about that. You think the earth remembers Ara? I know it does, Nizoni said, just as it will remember us. Late that summer, on a night when the air smelled of rain and the stars burned bright, Nizoni came to Mercer's room. She stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, wearing a simple cotton dress she'd sewn herself. Her hair was loose, falling past her shoulders in waves of black silk. The lamp flame flickered, casting her shadow long across the wooden floor. I am not afraid anymore, she said. Mercer sat up slowly, his heart beating hard against his ribs. He'd been lying awake listening to the night sounds, the crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of old wood settling. Nizoni, I want this, she said, stepping inside. Her bare feet made no sound. Not because I owe you, not because you saved me, but because I choose it. I choose you. He stood, the blanket falling away. He crossed the room in 3 long steps. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Her breath caught. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. Because once we cross this line, Nizoni, I won't be able to pretend you're just someone I helped. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw no doubt, no fear, only certainty. I have never been more sure of anything, she whispered. Instead of answering with words, she rose onto her toes and kissed him, soft, at first uncertain, her lips trembling slightly. Then with more confidence, more need, with the quiet desperation of someone finding her way back to life after a long cold winter, Mercer pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other settling at the small of her back. She fit against him perfectly, as if she'd been made for this moment. The kiss deepened, grew urgent. Years of loneliness, of grief, of thinking he'd never feel this way again. It all poured out of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his chest. He could feel her heart racing to match his own. I was dead inside, she said quietly. When you found me, I had given up. I thought if the fire didn't kill me, something else would. I didn't care anymore. And now, she pulled back to look at him. Now I want to live, not just survive. Live with you, here, on this land that remembers everything. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, like she was something holy he didn't quite deserve. That night they made promises without words. In the darkness of his room, with only starlight filtering through the window, they found in each other what they'd both thought lost forever, the courage to hope again. Autumn came and went in a blur of work and quiet contentment. They moved through the days as partners, now no longer dancing around what they were to each other. Mercer found himself smiling at odd moments, while mucking stalls, while fixing fence line, while watching Nizoni hang laundry in the wind the way Ara used to. But it didn't hurt anymore. The memory of Ara had softened from a knife edge of pain to something gentler, a warm sadness, a gratitude for what had been, and an acceptance that life moved forward. Nizoni noticed the changes in him too. The way his shoulders sat easier. The way he laughed, really laughed, when she told him stories about growing up in her village. The way he reached for her hand without thinking when they sat on the porch in the evenings. Winter returned, but this time the house wasn't cold. They kept the fire burning bright, and they kept each other warm. It was in January, when snow lay thick across the mesa, that Nizoni told him. She'd been sick in the mornings for a week. Mercer had worried it was fever coming back, that old wound reopening. But when he tried to make her rest, she just smiled, a secret kind of smile that made his heart skip. I am not sick, Mercer Hale, she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. I am with child. He went very still. For a long moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then it hit him all at once, joy so fierce it almost felt like pain. You're sure? His voice cracked. I am sure. 3 moons now, I think. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. His shoulders shook. She held him while he wept for the child he'd lost with Ara, for the years of emptiness, for this second chance he never thought he'd get. We're going to have a baby, he whispered against her hair. Yes, she said softly. We are going to have a family. When spring returned to Red Willow Ranch, it brought new life with it. Nizoni was heavy with child now, her belly round and proud beneath the doskin dress she'd made, decorated with small beads in patterns her mother had taught her. She moved slower, but with purpose, planting seeds in the garden, preparing the small room that would be the nursery. weaving a blanket with geometric patterns that told the story of mountains and rivers, and the journey from darkness to light. Mercer watched her with something close to wonder. He'd thought this part of his life was over. Thought he'd die alone in this house haunted by memories and regrets. But here was Nizoni singing softly, as she worked her hands resting on her belly, feeling the child move inside her. Sometimes she'd call him over, press his palm to where the baby kicked, and they'd laugh together at the strength of those tiny feet. He built a cradle from cedar wood, sanding it smooth, so no splinter could harm tender skin. He carved horses into the headboard, running horses free and wild. Nizoni lined it with soft rabbit fur and the blanket she'd woven. They prepared together, nesting like birds before winter. The baby was born at dawn on a clear morning in early May when the wildflowers painted the mesa in purple and gold. Nizoni labored through the night. Mercer stayed with her every moment, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement when the pain grew fierce. He'd done this before with Era, but that time had ended in death and silence. This time, when the sun finally broke over the red cliffs, a boy's cry, strong and furious, filled the house. Mercer held his son for the first time, tiny, red-faced, perfect, and felt something break open inside his chest. Not pain, something else. Something like hope made solid, made real, made flesh and blood and future. "What do we name him, Nizoni?" asked, exhausted but smiling, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Mercer looked down at the baby, then at her, this woman who'd come to him broken and left him whole. "You choose." She thought for a moment, her eyes distant. "Caleb. It means faithful in the white man's tongue. He will be faithful to this land, to his people, yours and mine, to the memory of those who came before." "Caleb Hale," Mercer said, testing the name. It felt right, solid, like a promise carved in stone, like something that would last. The baby quieted at the sound of his father's voice, and Mercer swore those tiny eyes dark as midnight focused on his face. "Welcome home, son," he whispered. "Welcome home." As Caleb grew, Red Willow Ranch grew with him. The boy was a year old when he took his first steps, toddling from Nizoni's arms to Mercer's, across the porch laughing with pure joy. 2 years old when he spoke his first words, Pa and Ma and horse. 3 years old when Mercer first lifted him onto a saddle and felt the boy's fearless delight. Mercer taught him everything he knew: how to talk to horses with your hands and your voice and your patience, how to read the sky for weather, how to fix what was broken and build what was needed, how to be gentle with things smaller than yourself, how to stand up to things bigger. Nizoni taught him songs in Apache, taught him to touch the earth each morning and thank it for holding him up, taught him which plants healed and which ones fed and which ones were sacred. She taught him that strength came from knowing when to fight and when to let go. That survival meant adapting, not breaking. The boy grew up bilingual, bicultural, belonging fully to both worlds and trapped by neither. One afternoon when Caleb was 4 years old, Mercer lifted him onto his horse and walked beside him to the edge of the property. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. "This land," Mercer said quietly, "belongs to your mother, to her people. I'm just keeping it safe until you're old enough to do it yourself." Caleb looked up at him with wide, serious eyes, Nizoni's eyes. "What about you, Pa? Don't it belong to you too?" Mercer smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't been able to make for years before Nizoni came into his life like a miracle wrapped in pain. "Me, I reckon I've done my part. I built the fences, kept the wolves away. But this land, it remembers your mother's people. It remembers the songs they sang. One day, you'll be the one to remember for all of us." The boy thought about that, his small face scrunched in concentration. Then he nodded solemnly, as if he understood something bigger than his 4 years should allow. From the house below, Nizoni's voice called out, warm and clear, carrying across the evening air. "Supper's ready. Come home." Caleb slid down from the rock and ran toward home, his laughter echoing across the land, scattering a flock of crows into the golden sky. Mercer stayed a while longer, listening to the wind move through the grass. The sound was like a song, old, familiar, alive. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel the weight of ghosts pressing on his chest. The wind swept across Red Willow Ranch, bending the grass like waves on a green ocean. From the porch, Nizoni lifted their son high in the air, both of them laughing, their voices blending with the sound of wind and meadowlarks and the distant lowing of cattle. Mercer closed his eyes and felt the last light of day paint his face gold. The land was quiet, but not lonely. Not anymore. He had fought for this, bled for it, nearly died for it, And now it lived breathing through the laughter of a child, the warmth of a woman's voice, the promise of seasons yet to come, the memory of those who'd walked this ground before and those who'd walk it after. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from heaven, he thought, opening his eyes to watch his family. Sometimes it grows from the dirt, the love and the blood we leave behind. Sometimes it comes in chains and fire, and you have to break it free with your own 2 hands. Sometimes it comes looking like the end of everything, and turns out to be the beginning instead. He stood slowly, his old wound pulling just a little, reminding him. Then he walked down from the ridge toward home, toward the light spilling from the windows, toward the sound of his son's laughter and his wife singing, toward life, toward everything he'd thought he'd lost forever and somehow impossibly found again. These cowboy love stories and Wild West stories remind us that freedom is worth fighting for, that love can grow even in the hardest soil, and that the land remembers everyone brave enough to defend it. Do you believe some people are worth fighting the whole world for? Drop your answer below. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because every love worth having is a love worth defending. The end. The wind over Lone Mesa carried the sound of loss. It hissed through cedar bones and hollow arroyos, brushing across the land like a ghost looking for somewhere to rest. Hale Rowan didn't believe in ghosts, but he lived like one, drifting from dawn to dusk, feeding horses, fixing fences, never talking to anyone but the wind. He'd built his cabin where the desert broke open into a bowl of red dust and sage, far enough from town to forget the sound of laughter, close enough to remember what he'd lost. Every morning he filled the tin pail, poured water for the horses, and stared into the horizon where the sun bled up like a wound. 3 years since the ambush at White Hollow. 3 years since the world took everything that made him human. He'd buried his wife and daughter in the dirt outside the cabin, 2 wooden crosses tilted by wind. And after that he'd made a vow: no more saving, no more touching, no more strangers. Then the scream tore across the canyon. It came from the east, sharp, desperate, echoing through stone. Not fear fury, a cry that refused to die. Hale froze mid-step, heart kicking against his ribs. Coyotes didn't scream like that, nor wolves. That was human. He grabbed his rifle. The horse was already restless, snorting against the reins. "Easy, girl," he murmured, swinging up. The wind was thick with sand as he rode toward the sound. The canyon narrowed. Dust turned to blood. He found her in the dry riverbed, one arm limp, leg torn, open skin, pale beneath streaks of crimson. Her eyes snapped open as his shadow fell across her. Dark eyes too steady for someone dying. He dismounted, kneeling beside her. "You alive?" She tried to move her lips. The word came out broken: "Help." He tore the scarf from his neck, wrapped it tight around her thigh. Blood soaked through instantly. The wound was deep, claws, maybe teeth. Coyotes. He looked around, rifle up. The pack was gone, but not far. He lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, all sinew and will. Her breath fluttered against his collar. He could feel the tremor of her heartbeat too fast. By the time he reached the cabin, night had fallen like a curtain. The fire guttered in the hearth as he kicked the door shut behind them. He laid her on the table where he used to skin game. Her skin burned under his hands. Fever already. He cleaned the wound with the last of his whiskey. She hissed, body arching, but didn't cry out. "Stay still," he muttered, stitching fast. When he finished, he wrapped her leg and stepped back. Her eyes were half closed, breath shallow. "You'll live," he said. She opened them again. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter." Her lips curved faintly, a ghost of defiance. "Everything matters." He turned away before she saw how her voice unsettled him. He poured water into a tin cup, held it out. She drank greedily, then whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer. Outside, coyotes howled. Inside, the fire cracked, and Hale Rowan realized how long it had been since another heartbeat had filled the cabin. Ayanna woke to the smell of smoke and rain. Her wounds throbbed, but she could move her foot. The man who saved her sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat jaw, set eyes gray and distant. "You could have left me," she said quietly. "I should have. Then why didn't you?" He didn't answer. He just set the knife down and stirred the coals. Sparks leapt, catching the edge of his scarred hands. She noticed then the faint tremor when he moved, the stiffness of someone who'd been alone too long. Outside, dawn painted the mesa in bruised gold. Ayanna pressed her palm to the dirt floor, whispering something under her breath. Hale caught the motion. "You praying, thanking," she said. "For what?" "For the earth." "It held me when the wolves didn't." He frowned. "That's some Apache custom." She looked at him, unflinching. "It's called gratitude." The corner of his mouth twitched. Haven't had much use for that lately. Days bled into one another. She healed faster